Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and the single most immoral movement on the planet Earth today is BDS, which many well-meaning but ill-informed Americans, including sadly many American Jews, especially college-age American Jews, think is simply a commonly used strategy of boycotts, divestments, and sanctions against a country that's doing something immoral and needs to be pressured economically in an effort to change that country's policies. In this case, Israel is the bad guy, and BDS is seen simply as an effort to end Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank and to stop Israel's brutalizing of the Palestinians. There are, however, two lies inherent in this formulation of BDS and one fatal misunderstanding of the stated, explicit goals of the BDS movement. The lies inherent in this formulation of BDS are: one, that Israel is illegally occupying the West Bank, and two, that Israel is guilty of brutalizing Palestinians. Factually, neither of these charges against Israel is true. They are severe distortions of reality at best, and are venal, consciously anti-Semitic canards at worst. But worst, this formulation fails completely to understand the explicit stated goals of the BDS movement. The BDS movement was started in 2004 by Omar Barghouti, a Palestinian who opposes the two-state solution. Barghouti's BDS movement opposes the existence of the State of Israel. BDS has nothing to do with the West Bank or with changing Israeli policy so that a two-state solution can be implemented. BDS seeks nothing less than the eradication of the Jewish State of Israel to be replaced by a binational Arab state. There is no other movement on the planet Earth which has as its goal the eradication of a nation-state of the United Nations. And any American who supports BDS is supporting a movement that wants to destroy the State of Israel. Again, sadly, the BDS movement has flourished on the college campus, in the leftist halls of academia. And the campus organization driving BDS is SJP. I constantly run into Jews who've never heard of SJP. But every one of you, every Jew, every American should know what SJP is and of the evil hatred it's fostering among naively idealistic college students, an overwhelming number of which are Jewish. The letters SJP stand for Students for Justice in Palestine. Justice in Palestine. Who can be against that? And many college students are attracted to an organization that portrays Israel as an apartheid, brutalizing occupier who think that SJP's goal is a two-state solution, where Israel and the Palestinians would live in peace side by side. But that's not what SJP wants. SJP is an arm of BDS. And SJP wants the exact same thing, the eradication of the State of Israel to be replaced by a binational state. And even the phrase binational is misleading. SJP and BDS do not want a cooperative Jewish Arab state. They want a state ruled by Arabs, which theoretically would tolerate Jews and Christians as well. SJP and BDS really want another Arab state, and they don't want any Israel anywhere in the Middle East. And if anyone should doubt this reality, that person should pay attention to the SJP chant, heard regularly on college campuses across our country. And the chant is,
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Where is Palestine? From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what must be free. Free of what? Free of any Jewish control, free of a state of Israel. As far as Barghouti and SJP and BDS are all concerned, there should be no Israel. And it may be hard to hear, but every adult and young person who supports SJP or BDS should know they are guilty of participating in an attempt to destroy a nation state of the United Nations, the Jewish state of Israel. Well, one organization is doing marvelous work, exposing SJP for what it is and what it's determined to do. The organization is ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, which has just come out with a major study documenting the venality of SJP. It's on the ISGAP website, if you'd like to look at it. And ISGAP has a fabulous website. When you click on ISGAP, you wind up never wanting to leave, wanting to read every piece on their homepage. And lucky me, I'm so pleased to say that the founding president of ISGAP, Charles Small, joins me on this edition of L'Chaim. Charles is also Senior Research Fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East and African Studies at Tel Aviv University. He's the author of numerous books and articles on anti-Semitism, including the 6th-volume Global Anti-Semitism, A Crisis of Modernity. And I'm proud to say Charles is a close personal friend of many, many years. He's one of the loveliest people you could ever meet. Thank you for joining us again here on L'Chaim. It's wonderful to have you once again at this table. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
How's ISGAP doing?
It's doing well.
By the way, you've expanded. You sort of have a home now at Oxford. You know, because people may have been following you on L'Chaim and on JBS so far. Bring us up to date. Where is your organization now?
So we've been a nonprofit organization here in the United States for about 16 years. Our headquarters are in New York. We have now an office in Canada. We're a charitable organization in Canada. And we have a hub of activity in Toronto. I'm here with my colleague from Toronto, Matthew Grossberg, who's with us, visiting New York for the first time, going around to meet our colleagues. We have a research center at La Sapienza University in Rome. It's the largest European university. So we have an entity there. We have a director of our Israel entity, Dr. Malat Tabori, who's the director of ISGAP in Israel. And now, about 2 months ago, I moved to Oxford University, where I'm a research scholar. And we have 2 programs there. We have the Summer Institute, where we bring professors from all over the world.
Like whom?
This year we had 86 scholars, and we bring professors to teach professors on anti-Semitism, and some of our teachers were, this year, Deborah Lipstadt was there, Ayan Hersiali, Natan Sharansky. We have the who's who of scholars from around the world. We have about 30 professors teaching the 86 professors, and we teach them on the condition that they create a course on contemporary anti-Semitism with us, using their expertise, and that they go home to their home university and teach courses for credits for at least 2 years. So now we have 250 graduates who are teaching about these issues that you outlined in your important introduction. that are beginning, we're sort of creating a grassroots movement of professors to deal with anti-Semitism. And I would just say that we've put a lot of the responsibility on this issue on students, on the kids. And they're beginning to respond, and they're doing amazing things at universities. But I think the adults, our organized community, and the professors, the adults in the room, need to also take a leadership role. And what we're doing is, I think we believe that the most respected member of a university community and those who stay for many decades are the professors. And if professors begin to teach these issues from an informed, scholarly perspective, they'll legitimize the issue in the universities where it's not legitimate to deal with them, and begin to have maybe a more impact on these important issues taking place at American universities. And we're also creating a program that will start in March at Merton College, which is a very prestigious, the oldest college at Oxford University, where we're going to be training civil servants, mostly from ministries of education of countries. It's a 4-day workshop that we're sort of executive training programs that we'll do. So we're doing that in Oxford. We're doing more seminars around the world. And we have 2 research projects. One is looking at Islamist funding of American universities. And another one is to try to create a way to measure anti-Semitism with more effectiveness. And as you mentioned in the introduction, coming out of this project on following the money, following the funding of American universities by political Islamists or the Muslim Brotherhood, we did a short piece on the sort of the bottom of the food chain, the bottom part of the money, the cheapest part of the funding, has been going to student groups, mainly the Students for Justice in Palestine, and we just published a report on who they are, where they come from, and what their activities are. So we're busy.
Yasher koach, mazal tov. You know, I want to talk to you about some of the issues that you've raised. They're all on my list. But one more moment of sort of just your personal journey here. And again, I hope many people have followed you on JBS, and I've been privileged, thanks to you, to be able to present ISGAP programs all the time on JBS. But Charles, you started at Yale, and then Yale basically said to you, we don't want you here anymore. And that was a very hard time for you. And it could have been that that was the end of ISGAP. And it wasn't. And lo and behold, what you've described now is quite a burgeoning and robust operation, all dedicated to this same goal of studying anti-Semitism. It's not for study's sake. You have a goal of your own, of what you hope all the study you do and all the teaching you do, and when I say you, I mean you in the larger ISGAP sense, will have an impact in the halls of academia. But for one moment, I want you to reflect for me and the JBS audience. As you look at what happened to you from the day they kicked you out of Yale to now, what's it mean to you? And how do you feel about it? And how do you think about it?
So it's a good question. So I would say what happened at Yale didn't only happen to me as an individual. It was a group of us. We were 14 scholars and administrators.
But you were the head of it.
I was the head of it. And what we were trying to do is put the study of contemporary anti-Semitism, the rise of political Islam, not Islam, but radical political Islam, and their use of anti-Semitism and the sort of the emerging Red-Green Alliance, looking at radical left reactionary anti-Semitism and studying it and mapping it and decoding it. And for some people in the United States, and this was in 2011 at the height of the Obama administration, at the height of, I'd say, a euphoria on the left in this country, the so-called left on this country, that somehow working out some sort of deal with Iran was going to solve the problems of the region. We were critical of it, and at that moment there wasn't place in the academy, in the media of record for those views. And that, I think what happened to us was an indication of a changing dynamic at American universities, particularly American universities, and I'd say even in the American Jewish community. And interestingly, I should say that in a sense, ISGAP, we took a step back. I was born in Montreal, I'm Canadian, I'm now American as well, which I'm grateful for.
So you can now vote in America?
I can.
Because every time we've met before, you couldn't have.
Correct.
This is very interesting.
It is.
It permits me to ask you different kinds of questions.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
But what's interesting, I kind of took a step back and I found colleagues in Canada, scholars and philanthropists and leaders of the Jewish community, mainly in Toronto and a little bit in Montreal, who get it. And I think the Canadian Jewish community, the politics of Canadian society is different than the politics in the United States, particularly now, particularly in the last decade or so. And I think Canadian Jews, whether they're liberal or conservative or secular or religious, they get it. They get the issues. And
in ways that American Jews don't?
In ways that American Jews haven't. And maybe now, in the wake of the last few weeks and few months and year of rising anti-Semitism that we can no longer ignore or just look to Israel and the Middle East as the source or the place where the problem is. We now know that there's a problem in our country.
Is there a problem also in Canada?
There is. I think it's a global problem. It's now I'm based in Oxford in the United Kingdom. There's a serious issue with Corbyn potentially being elected prime minister, where he doubles down. He's a true believer in this.
He says he's not, you know.
I know. But he refused to apologize 2 nights ago on the BBC to the Jewish community, despite the fact that 40% of British Jews are thinking of leaving the country if he's elected. So he doubles down, even though he keeps claiming he's not an anti-Semite. 87%, or actually more, over 90% of British Jews think he is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, we recently had Benjamin Anthony on JBS. His parents, who've lived in the UK their whole life, have made Aliyah to Israel now in their 70s because they're afraid of what will happen if Corbyn's elected.
Yeah. So there's serious issues. And there are serious issues in Canada. Last week in Toronto at York University and the University of Toronto, there were 2 horrible instances.
What happened?
So York University, there was an event of Israeli Army reservists were brought by the Jewish community, the Jewish students of York. More than 800 or so BDS supporters from the Students for Justice in Palestine and the Antifa group protested very aggressively.
This
there was
far
violence,
left.
Far left and the Islamists, the Red-Green Alliance. And they tried to disrupt the event, and it was very aggressive, and there was violence. And then at the University of Toronto was the first university to have the BDS movement accepted in 2005. And I didn't know this until last week. They have a permanent committee at the university to ensure that the University of Toronto is free of anything Zionist or Israeli. The Hillel at the University of Toronto asked the student union to get permission to have kosher food on campus because every student pays money into a food charge as part of their tuition, and there isn't any kosher food. And the student union responded by saying that if they would allow kosher food, it would be too Israeli. That is, kosher food is too Israeli to have at the University of Toronto, and it's not in accordance with the BDS resolution. So they were banning kosher food. They subsequently sort of apologized, but it's not clear if they'll have kosher food. So we can see across in the United Kingdom and Canada, and now here, that anti-Zionism or anti-Israeli rhetoric, which you so eloquently introduced at the beginning of the program, is not just a question for our brothers and sisters in Israel, but it's a question of anti-Semitism here in the United States, in the most elite institutions, in our best universities, and in our media of record. And this is an issue that the Jewish community of the United States needs to wake up on and needs to understand that contemporary anti-Semitism is not just the demonization of Israel and Zionism, it's the demonization of Jews. So you can see no kosher food at the University of Toronto, a multicultural democratic city where elite students and scholars are allowing this to take place. The same is happening on our college campuses in the United States. The same is happening in our media of record.
Is it that bad on American college campuses?
I think it's worse in that our community, unlike the Canadian Jewish community and the British Jewish community and the French Jewish community and the Belgian Jewish community and the Italian Jewish community, communities throughout the diaspora, they've had to deal with this perhaps a bit longer, and they've woken up to the fact that this is a serious issue. I think our community has been divided. Parts of the community, so I think maybe more on the conservative side or the Orthodox side of the community, have long acknowledged this issue or have come to recognize this issue earlier. And I think the liberal Jewish community has perceived this as bringing up issues of anti-Semitism as advocacy. That's why they can close down our center at Yale, not deal with this important issues for many, many years in the New York Times and other important media outlets. But now we realize that there's a problem. I think the left, Barry Weiss's book, finally, I think, is a wake-up call for liberal Jews to realize that there's something happening in this country, and it's a rotten disease that has now permeated our universities, our media, and it's now in our institutions of governance. Mm-hmm. And it's time for the community to wake up. And Natan Sharansky, who wrote an introduction to our report, who's our new chairperson at ISGAP, which is a great honor, he said that the Jewish community, that the people on the right must fight anti-Semitism on the right, and the people on the left must fight the anti-Semitism on the left. And that this is an issue that's a fundamental threat to democratic principles.
You know, in the American Jewish community, there is a lot of criticism of white supremacists and white supremacy. And when you hear people talk, or even when there are gatherings devoted to the issue of anti-Semitism, almost the entire emphasis is on the anti-Semitism that comes from the far, far right. There's very little discussion of any other anti-Semitism. As you look at the American scene, where do you feel the greater threat is coming from?
So I think that's a very American question. And I think the question fails to address the issue. I don't think we should get into a competition whether it's worse on the left or worse on the right or worse in the Muslim community. The issue is we should have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, period. Whether it's in the Muslim community or from Islamic teachings, or Islamist teachings rather, or it's from the left or from the right.
Okay, but by the way, there's a very practical reason that I asked that question. If it turns out that the Jewish community is not verbally, actively, vocally acknowledging the threat from the left and only portrays to the larger Jewish community that the threat is coming from the right, there's a serious distortion of reality at the present time. And so it's not about there's anti-Semitism everywhere. Yes, I know that. Mm-hmm. The question is, do you feel, because maybe you don't feel that at the moment in America the threat really is serious from the left, and it's very serious from the right. And I've said on JBS all the time, there is anti-Semitism. White supremacists have been anti-Semitic forever. And they are a very small group on the American scene. What frightens the hell out of me in a way that I never expected to be frightened was that I now see it emanating from what is associated with the left and liberal community. And the worst thing for me is that if it seeps into the halls of Congress, if there are congressmen and congresswomen who want to use anti-Israel rhetoric, they're really using anti-Semitic rhetoric. And the fact that it's in Congress, that there are at least 2, 3, 4 congresswomen who have said blatantly, not simply anti-Israel, but anti-Semitic things, who support BDS, Charles. We have people in Congress supporting BDS. And we just had a letter written to Secretary of State Pompeo criticizing the fact that the Trump administration says, you know, there's nothing illegal about settlements on the West Bank. And that doesn't mean anything more than they're not illegal. Mm-hmm. And we had virtually half the members of the Democratic members of Congress writing a letter saying to Pompeo, they're criticizing him for that decision, and they're saying it puts American security at risk, that Israel is putting American security at risk by having settlements on the West Bank. And I want to know from you, because you have studied this, to what extent does whatever is coming out of the far left, the left, what you see in the Democratic Party, to what extent does that worry you?
I think the situation is worrying. I think that the societies are dividing. I think the increase of nationalism and white supremacy and right-wing nationalist anti-Semitism is something that needs to be taken seriously. There's the threat of violence from that extreme, small, perhaps growing segment of society is serious. I think they've demonstrated that they can be violent, and we need to, I think, be alert and understand what's taking place. So that's very serious. The root of that ideology of white supremacy, of white supremacist anti-Semitism, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, Nazism, also, interestingly, is very much connected to political Islam. Most people don't know this, but the Muslim Brotherhood that started about 100 years ago took European anti-Semitism, took the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and put it as a core element of their ideology. And later, as the Nazis rose to power in Europe, took part of their ideology and infused it into political Islam, and as we know, formed alliances, healthy alliances that worked during the Holocaust and during the Second World War, and even after the Holocaust period. So ideologically, there's a strong link between white supremacists and white supremacist Nazi ideology and anti-Semitism and political Islam.
What evidence do you have that it's grown?
I think surveys, the ADL survey, FBI reports, there's a growing segment of the population that is demonstrating anti-Semitic rhetoric and racist rhetoric. I think that's taking place. But what's interesting, I think what Deborah Lipstadt and Barry Weiss write importantly about is that the left, the liberal, so-called liberal intellectuals, give cover to political Islam. They give cover to white supremacy because as they blame Israel for all of these issues, I think they're setting up Jews and Israel as a legitimate target intellectually and ideologically. So it's a very dangerous recipe, I think, that's taking place because there's an attack on the center of our society. There's an attack on notions of citizenship and the democratic institutions from the extreme right, from the nationalists, also from the extreme left, and of course political Islam wants to destroy the great Satan and the small Satan.
I almost understand. Are you saying to me that SJP and BDS are in some way expressions of white supremacy?
No. What I'm saying is that the discourse in the university, the discourse in the media of record, the discourse that's now entering the halls of Congress and beyond, that demonizes Israel, that demonizes Zionism, that demonizes Israel in spite of the fact that it's now on its borders, right on its borders, dealing with not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but its offshoots of Islamic Jihad and ISIS and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Iranian Revolutionary Regime, social movements that are diametrically opposed to basic notions of human decency, democracy, and citizenship. So how can a left-wing intellectual, despite the contradictions and problems which exist in Israeli society, it's not a perfect place by any means, it's flawed, it's a wonderful democracy, a vibrant society, but not perfect, and it's always striving to improve. But how can any liberal, how can anybody concerned about human rights be critical of Israel at a time when it's being attacked, at a time when there's a genocide taking place in Syria? 15 million displaced people, up to 1 million people killed in wars between political Islamists from the Shiite world and from the Sunni world. What do liberals expect Israel to do, so-called liberals? What are they criticizing? If the United States of America was attacked with thousands of rockets and threats of annihilation, would we sit idly by here and be critical of the contradictions and problems in our society, or would we rally around to defend ourselves? So there's something dangerous happening internationally. And when the Students for Justice of Palestine, which is directly connected to the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, which comes out of this ideology that wants to not only destroy Israel, but kill Jews. Yosef Kawadawi, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, the founder of Islamic Studies at Oxford University, where I am now, calls on all true believers to finish the work of Hitler. This is where the Students of Justice of Palestine comes from. They're not just anti-Israel, like some of the postmodern liberal Jews around this city would like to believe, and some of the intellectuals. They are anti-Jewish. So when the University of Toronto passes a resolution that's not just anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, but banning kosher food, the American Jewish community better wake up, because it's happening at Columbia University. It's happening at our finest universities here. And it's dangerous. So we have the liberals and the Islamists on our campus now fighting to be, you can say, anti-Israel, but they're also anti-Semitic. Their goal is based on the protocols of the Elders of Zion and even Nazi ideology. So it's time we educate ourselves on what's happening.
Okay. Well, you say it so well. I hope everybody hears every word you say. And there are issues that I want to talk to you that come out of what you just said. But I want to push you one more moment. Because what I heard you say at the end was that SJP, the BDS movement, is aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood.
It's a part of, comes out of it.
Okay.
Yep.
And you associated that with the left.
Yes.
And all I said to you, and I want to say it gently,
Okay.
and I don't want my audience to, I don't want the JBS audience to misunderstand me. It is horrendous for a white nationalist to take any kind of assault weapon into a synagogue and murder people, murder people, okay? And we saw it happen twice now. The reality, however, is it's not the first time in my lifetime where people have gone into Jewish institutions in America with weapons and shot Jews to death. This is not new, but it doesn't happen often, and it's part of a larger ugliness in America where black churches are being shot up and gay bars are being shot up and people are shot when they go to a rock concert. It's nuts. But that's something I've seen my entire life. What happened in Pittsburgh, what happened in Poway is the gunman was more successful. But I've seen this happen, and had the gunman been more successful, there would have been more deaths in Kansas City and in Seattle. So this is not new, but something is new. SJP is new. BDS is new. And it's new in the halls of Congress. And so I say to you again, because I'm hoping you'll say it. I'm not pretending. I'm hoping you'll say, yes, the anti-Semitism on the right should never be ignored. We should be vigilant. It is horrible. But at the moment, the major concern the American Jewish community should have is not about crazy white people, white supremacists. It's not. It's about the inability to say that there is radical Islamic fundamentalism and a Muslim Brotherhood that's aligned with the left, which has seeped into the halls of academia and is seeping into the halls of the United States Congress. That's the threat of anti-Semitism in America. And I want to hear Charles Small either say, yes, I'll buy it, or Mark, you're wrong.
No, I agree with you. I think most of the work of ISGAP focuses on exactly what you're saying. And that type of anti-Semitism, this sort of red-green alliance, political Islam.
Oh, explain what the red-green alliance is.
So the radical left, radical postmodern liberals, whatever they call it.
That's the green.
That's the red.
That's the red.
The green are the Islamists.
Okay.
The BDS movement, the Students for Justice in
All right.
Palestine.
So for Dara, I'm going to say again, that's the red, and the green is?
The Islamists. The BDS movement is the radical Islamists, and they've masterfully entered into a coalition with the so-called progressives. And that is a serious threat in the finest universities in the United States of America and around the Western world, and now in the halls of power, in the halls of governance in this country.
Doesn't that frighten you?
It's a serious issue, and we've worked diligently on this issue. And I think this is a very serious issue. I think it goes back.
Is your use of the word serious my use of the word frightening? Or you mean it's serious, but it doesn't frighten you yet?
I think we're living in a time of, Elie Wiesel said, who was the founding president of ISGAP, he said that in 2003 that we're living in a time of great urgency. And then he said, no. He went on to correct himself and he said, no, we're living in a time of a great emergency. And that he was never so frightened and concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism in 2003 as he was since the end of the war, the end of the Holocaust.
By the way, no one was talking this way in 2003.
Elie Wiesel was, ISGAP was. We started officially in 2004. We started because of the spread of Islamist ideology and the sort of the emerging red-green, the radical left and the radical Muslims alliance in the Western world. So these are very serious issues. But I think also what we need to understand is that something is happening. The center is being attacked, if you will, from the radical left, from radical Islam, not Muslims and Islam, but political Islam, the radical Muslims.
What is radical Islam?
And I also just say the radical right.
Okay, fine.
We have to acknowledge the fact that there is a rise of nationalism, there's a rise of xenophobia, there is a rise of white supremacy, and there is violence on the right.
Okay, where is that? Where is that?
I
Oh,
think
by the way, you understand, if you live on the East Coast, you live in New York and Connecticut, New Jersey, you don't see this.
No.
Where would I see it?
Well, we live, it's interesting, the KKK started, I believe, in Binghamton, New York.
I don't care. You don't see it here. I have not once run into anyone who is xenophobic or who expresses in either word or subtlety the notion that you're suggesting. So I'm wondering, where is it? By the way, I see the other all the time.
I think if you look at the impeachment hearings and you look at the discourse that is either directly or indirectly associated with the impeachment hearings and some of the witnesses that have come forth and some of the analysis that is emerging on the extreme right in this country about, for example, yesterday there were headlines about Jew coups. Jew coups. That's a new word that I've learned just yesterday.
Who used that word?
Radical Christians, radical Christian magazines.
And what does it refer to?
It's referring to some of the witnesses that are coming forth in the impeachment process, or trial, the hearings rather, that are Jewish, of Jewish origin, Jewish foreign-born American citizens. And there's a discourse emerging on the right that is concerning. There is a discourse on the radical left about Jews and Israel and Zionism that you and I now discuss, and we're engaged in that area. You and I discussed the radical left and radical Islam as a threat to Jewish citizens in this country, to issues of global anti-Semitism. For many years, you were on the cutting edge. You were one of the few media outlets that actually dealt with this issue, and you're still, unfortunately, one of the few. But it's beginning now with Barry Weiss's book and the events that are unfolding. It's becoming difficult to ignore in certain circles, which is great. But I'm also telling you that anti-Semitism is not just an Islamic problem or just a leftist problem or just a right-wing problem, which it is. Anti-Semitism to me is like the Jews, or Elie Wiesel always said that anti-Semitism begins with Jews, but it never ends with Jews. There is something happening in our society. There's something happening globally that I believe is connected to an economic, I would say, crisis, a global economic crisis. This is some of the research that we've done, and I don't want to get too scholarly and academic and esoteric. There is something happening globally. Societies are collapsing. Governments and states are collapsing. There's a tremendous refugee and migration crisis. There's civil wars at levels that we haven't seen in many, many years, at least since the end of the Second World War. Migration, refugees, it's threatening native workers. It's threatening native citizens. In this country, there are many people displaced. In Europe, there are people who are feeling displaced by the wave of refugees coming in from the Middle East and from Africa. Here, it's South America and other countries. And there is a rising discourse of xenophobia and nationalism, and also white supremacy. Now, I don't know what's more dangerous or what your favorite flavor is, but there's something happening in our society, and as a scholar, I'm interested in these processes. So if I had to rank them, I guess I could rank which kind of anti-Semitisms in the contemporary context.
I don't want you to rank them.
Yeah. But they're all dangerous, and they're leading to violence.
Okay,
Yeah.
I want to say it a different way.
Okay.
And again, you've made your case, and you make it very, very well. And I don't need to push you around. I'll say it very differently. Within the general Jewish community, you wouldn't know there was any problem from the Islamic anti-Semitism. You'd only think it was white, because that's the way the American Jewish leadership at the moment are presenting it. They're presenting it as this is a matter of white supremacists. I am not saying that there are no white supremacists. I am saying that I believe it, and you haven't given me evidence to the contrary yet, I believe it is there is a more direct threat from the far left, from what I see in the halls of Congress, which is not white supremacy. It is, however, leftist ideology. And it also concerns me that within the American Jewish leadership, and especially within the liberal-leaning Jewish community, there's no discussion of Islamic fundamentalism. There's only a discussion of white supremacists with guns. And for the third time, it's not that they shouldn't be taken seriously, but the reality for me is I look at the world, I look at what's happening in our country, and what I really see is a kind of anti-Israel bias expressed by SJP, which has suckered. I don't think these are bad people. The young Jews I meet who defend SJP, or I meet adult Jews who tell me, what's wrong? What's wrong with BDS? BDS doesn't want to destroy Israel. It wants to make Israel better. And what we're going to do, just like we did with South Africa, we're going to do this now with Israel. We're not against Israel. Yes, but do you understand who you're aligning yourself with? And I don't hear American Jewish leadership saying what you're saying. And so when I have you on JBS, what I want to hear from Charles Small is, of course there's a problem on the far right, but you know what? It's not the far right in the halls of Congress. It's not the far right that is now destroying. There are people now who want to change the First Amendment. We shouldn't have free speech as it's been known classically in our country. It's all coming from the left, and that's why I have you at this table, and I'm sort of saying, oh, if Charles Small says it, it's different than if Mark Golub says it.
So I agree with you in general. I think right-wing nationalist, xenophobic politics, racism, anti-Semitism should not be taken lightly. Having said that, we were closed at Yale because liberal Jews, in this kind of liberal American Jewish scholars, could not handle the fact that we were looking at anti-Semitism on the left or in spaces or societies in the Islamic world, places that were once colonized.
Yes, but what I want everyone to understand, the real criticism of ISGAP at Yale, which is at least what the argument they gave you was, you're going after Islam. It was the Islamic work you were doing that made Yale very upset.
It was the Islamist work that we were doing, and the fact that intellectuals and political leaders in this country were engaging and meeting and entering into relations with the Muslim Brotherhood and the Iranian Revolutionary regime. The fact that
which you've tried to expose both of.
Correct. We spent most of my energy is focused on that. President Obama, when he went, instead of going to visit Canada, which is traditionally the first trip of a newly elected president, he went to Egypt and invited as special guests in the front row members of the Muslim Brotherhood and helped usher in a Muslim Brotherhood-led regime in Egypt. The fact that he engaged the Iranian Revolutionary regime and entered into agreement and transferred money and power and legitimacy to that regime, to me was an act of anti-Semitism. These are social movements that are not only out to destroy Israel, they're out to liquidate Jews based on Nazi and European ideology.
Okay, you're not saying that
But
he did it as an anti-Semitic act.
I think that whether somebody does something, if you commit a crime and you do it by mistake, you're not conscious of the law, you're still guilty of the crime, but your sentence will be
All right, but
lighter.
the argument is that Barack Obama came into the White House and wanted to readjust Middle East policy. He felt it was tilting too far. I know.
Yeah.
He felt it was tilting too far towards Israel,
Correct.
and that he wanted to let the Palestinians and the Arab world know there was a president now in the White House who cared about them also, and they was going to be more even-handed. That's why he went to Cairo. He didn't go to Cairo to be anti-Semitic.
So you asked me the question, why it was difficult to be at Yale,
Yes.
why it's difficult to deal with anti-Semitism in the contemporary context. And it is difficult. People, liberals, liberal Jewish members of the community, liberal institutions, liberal synagogues, don't want to look or cannot look at anti-Semitism on the left, and they are apprehensive about engaging in an analysis or looking at anti-Semitism in the Islamic world. And the BDS movement, which is run by and orchestrated by the Muslim Brotherhood and funding from Qatar and funding from nefarious sources in our universities. And the community is not really engaging that. And that was your point, and I agree completely with you. What President Obama intended to do is, I don't know what's in his heart, Jewish ethics.
Oh, he made a mistake. He made a mistake, but I don't know that it was motivated out of anti-Semitism.
I never said it was motivated. I don't know what's in his heart. I know for a fact that if you sit down at a table, and now you're speaking ethically and philosophically, and I would say politically, if you sit down and engage in agreements, and through those agreements legitimize and empower a group, a social movement, a reactionary social movement, that's fundamental aim is to exterminate an identifiable group of people, that is a serious problem, and that is a problem, and that's a problem that is not being engaged in seriously in American universities, and it's not being taken seriously enough, I would say, by the American Jewish community, and now by political leaders, and it's very dangerous. And I think that anti-Semitism is not just a problem for the Jews. As Elie Wiesel said, it begins with Jews, doesn't end with Jews. This is an early warning system for a failing society. If you start blaming Jews and allowing this type of politics, anti-democratic politics, to enter into our policy, to enter into our discourse, the fact that liberal intellectuals in this country and policymakers legitimized a deal with people that are out to exterminate another group of people, I am sorry. You know, we can have all sorts of motivations, but philosophically, if you look at Emmanuel Levinas, if you look at Jewish ethics, if you look at human decency, all sorts of ethical frameworks and traditions, to engage with people that want to enslave or segregate or exterminate other groups of people is immoral, unethical, and we will eat away and destroy our own institutions. And that, tragically, is exactly what's happening. The fact that the United States of America and other Western countries have engaged the Muslim Brotherhood, have engaged the Iranian revolutionary regime, is not only increasing anti-Semitism, which is a simple symptom of a larger problem. There are genocides taking place in the Middle East. There's human rights repression at the highest possible levels taking place in Syria. Today in Iran, where people are fighting for democratic principles, where is the Western world? Where are our interests? What are our short-term interests, and how are they impacting us to act in a moral, ethical way to fight for human rights of Kurdish people, of Yazdis, of Syrians, of Iranian people fighting for basic democratic life? Why are we silent? Why do we engage these people and expect, if we engage them in Egypt, if we engage them in Gaza, if we engage them and work with them in Tehran, why are we shocked? Why are we shocked that our universities and our institutions are now, this disease of anti-Semitism has entered into our society? Why in this moment of internet, and social media, where information flies around the world in a fraction of a second, why are we shocked that we are now facing the same problem in the United States of America at our finest institutions? Why should we be surprised? And the fact, if you're still correct that liberals would like to focus just on the extreme right because it's easy to fight the fascism of 75, 80 years ago, it's tragic. But I'm saying we still have to fight that extremism. But yes, I know that some people are very comfortable fighting the Nazis and the fascism and the anti-Semitism of 80 years ago and crying about the Jews that perished horrifically in the most I can't even fathom what the Holocaust is morally, ethically, and materially, the destruction. That they want to fight for the rights of dead Jews is wonderful, but we have to also fight for democratic principles and human rights and the lives of living Jews and living Kurds and living Yazdis and living Syrians and living Iranians. And for the Obama administration to work with the Muslim Brotherhood, I don't know what his intentions were, but just look around. Look at the Middle East and look at our institutions and see what's happening.
Is it possible that there was no Charles Small in his group that could have given him this insight and he just didn't know better?
Well, I would say that one thing I think that Barack Hussein Obama, and you weren't allowed to say that middle name before he went to Egypt, but you were allowed apparently after. Right? You remember those days we couldn't say that word? Yeah.
I thought you couldn't do it even afterward, but
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
that's his name.
But during the campaign you couldn't do it.
No, it was racist, apparently. He was, I would argue, the smartest guy in the room 9.5 times out of 10. The guy was educated and worldly, and he wasn't this sort of naive, I actually think it's sort of a form of racism to think that somehow he was naive. It's actually kind of a paternalist form of racism that is alive and well in liberal circles. I think it's quite racist to look at somebody like Barack Obama and say that he didn't know any better. The guy was a smart guy, and he was surrounded by people who had a certain perspective and a certain agenda, and they were also bright, educated people. Maybe the smartest in the country. But
by the way, his advisors, Jewishly, very many of them were associated with J Street.
Correct.
Are you suggesting J Street also knew what
of course
the danger he was about to enter in?
Of course they knew. I went to the first J Street conference to see the people. There were people there. Of course they knew what they were doing.
Does J Street want to in some way embolden or strengthen the Muslim Brotherhood?
I think that's what they did. And were they simply naive? You know, we had the head of national security, national intelligence saying that they weren't a religious organization. They were a peaceful, heterogeneous secular organization.
The Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think they all made mistakes. I think they had a certain agenda, and I would say also people looking at issues of anti-Semitism, looking at the threat that these reactionary social movements had in Iran and in Egypt to basic human decency and human rights and democratic principles, I would say we were silenced. I was not the only person, and ISGAP wasn't the only entity that was closed. There was the Iranian Human Rights Center at Yale was closed a few months before we were closed. Michael Oren left unceremoniously a few months before I left. So there was a silencing at Yale and other institutions in the United States of America that who from people or perspectives from the left and from the right who are looking at the threat of political Islam.
Are Jewish leaders at the moment vocal enough? And the reason I ask that question is there are some who feel that we are reliving the same kind of fear that we criticized after the Shoah. And the phrase "never again" usually refers to there should never be a Holocaust again. And I keep saying that never again also means that the Jewish community would never again be silent, quiet, work only behind the scenes, but would go public with their concerns, loud and strong, if they ever developed again. And as you look at the Jewish landscape, do you feel, as I do, that in some way Jewish leadership is making a similar mistake to what was made in the 1930s and 40s, and that people are saying, we don't want to make waves, and we don't want to embarrass anybody, and we have to work with these people, so we will work behind the scenes. You don't know what's happening. We're making progress. We'll work behind the scenes because that's the way you do things, in a proper and respectful way. How do you feel about that?
So it's a good question, and I think it speaks to your concerns. That yes, for example, the IRA definition, the definition of contemporary anti-Semitism that makes the link between anti-Zionism and Israel bashing and contemporary anti-Semitism. The European Union, Canada, Australia, countries throughout the world, provinces in Canada, institutions, universities throughout the world, organizations have adopted the IRA definition. I was told, and I may be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, that major Jewish organizations in the United States of America will find it difficult to adopt the definition because it links contemporary anti-Semitism to Israel. And because people supporting the Democratic Party may find that link difficult. If that's true, I think your concerns will be realized. If the American Jewish establishment, major Jewish organizations, won't adopt the IRA definition in 2019, we have a serious problem.
Say the IRA definition again.
So the IRA definition is a definition of anti-Semitism that many nations around the world have adopted. The State Department has adopted it, but the United States government has not officially. It's a definition of contemporary anti-Semitism that makes the direct link between blaming Jews over Israeli policy or bashing Israel or saying Israel is a racist apartheid state, which is now common currency at universities. I was told recently that maybe some major Jewish organizations won't be able to accept that definition. If that's true, your concerns are raised, because I think the Jewish community must embrace that definition and ensure that the most powerful country in the world, the most democratic nation in the world, must be the leader on this issue of fighting anti-Semitism and to adopt this issue, this definition.
You heard my description of SJP at the beginning of this program. What have you learned from your study and this major study that ISGAP put out that you would want to amplify anything I've said or correct anything I've said?
So the report is available for free on our website at isgap.org. The thing that struck me is we had access to social media accounts by leaders of the Students for Justice in Palestine. And their anti-Semitism was so vulgar and so vile and so over the top. I kept telling my associates, we can't publish this, it can't be true. Please verify if this is true, because we don't want to publish anything that's incorrect. And if we do publish anything incorrect, the whole the assertions of our report will be called into question, and rightfully so. So that the praising Hitler, calling for the destruction of Israel, blaming Jews for the old horrible stereotypes and the new contemporary anti-Semitism was pervasive. So we have access to social media, and these quotes are in our report. And what we try to do is to put this anti-Semitism into context. So making the connection between the Muslim Brotherhood, what the Muslim Brotherhood stands for and stood for, their links to Nazism and white supremacy, and how the Muslim Student Association of the United States was the forerunner for the Students for Justice in Palestine, and Barghouti, as you mentioned, rebranded the Muslim Student Association and the Nation of Islam in the United States of America that has a long tradition at American universities, and rebranded it as a progressive human rights Free Palestine movement in which uneducated liberals have joined this coalition. And it's a very effective coalition. And we're trying to contextualize it and put it into historical and political context. And I think it's the first time that a report of this kind tries to put into historical context in the United States. And as a footnote, I was just in Pittsburgh. There was an amazing conference of Jewish students, not only Jewish students, but students who want to fight anti-Semitism on campus. There were about 400 students from all the organizations, from Stand With Us, from Hillel, from Chabad. It was a no-ego gathering of students. And
Under whose auspices?
It was the ACT organization out of Boston. The Boston Federation funded this wonderful day in Pittsburgh. And I spoke about anti-Semitism to 400 eager students who are willing and able and wanting to start a movement. And they're amazing, young, bright
thrilling,
kids.
Charles.
It is thrilling. But I asked them in my speech, has anybody heard of Kutub or El-Banah? Does anybody know what I'm saying? 400 eager students are ready to fight anti-Semitism. Not one knew who they were. And they are, as you know, the founding fathers, the founding intellectuals of the Muslim Brotherhood that used Nazism to promote the Muslim Brotherhood. So what I said to them is, we have to know the mind of our enemy. And what liberals often do is impose their imagination or their view of the world onto reality. And there's a profound disconnect. We need to understand the reality, and we need to understand the mind of our enemy. We need to respect our enemy enough to understand their culture, their political philosophy, their ideology, what they want, what they need, what they value, and what their mission is. And until our community does that, studies it, we're going to be lost. We should study it and learn it. Once we know it, we can debate. One person may say we should do this, the other person will say we should do that, but at least it'll be from a position of knowledge. So our community must read The Nation of Islam. Read Kutub's Struggle Against the Jews. My Struggle Against the Jews, Kutub. He wrote this in the United States of America in the 1950s. It's a very important document that should be understood and read by everybody who cares about human rights in this country and cares about what's happening on university campuses. So I think once our students are educated, once our faculty are educated, once our community organizations know what the threat is and how this profound contradiction, how can radical, reactionary, religious ideology, what does that have in common with liberal, secular, progressive ideology? They have one thing in common. They want to destroy little Satan and big Satan, and it's their anti-Semitism. What does Corbyn have in common with the Iranian revolutionary regime if it's not for this hatred of Israel and the Jewish people? So we need to become aware of this urgently, and we're late. We're late to the table. We're late to the debate. We're late to this war against us, and there is a war against us.
When I said earlier that young people tend to be seduced into thinking that they're joining a liberation movement that only has, the best idealistic values at heart, and that what they're really trying to do is make Israel better, and that Israel and the Palestinians should live side by side. And what I said is, that's not what SJP's goal is. To what extent do you feel I'm accurate?
I think you're accurate, and I think it's a serious problem. When I was a student, I was very active in the student struggle for Soviet Jewry, and my classmates, my community in the United States and Canada, we knew who the refuseniks were. We knew their names. We knew where they lived. We knew what sentences they had in prison or in labor camps. We knew everything. I was part of the anti-apartheid movement, the real anti-apartheid movement. We knew the laws. We knew the people. We knew the information and the history, and we were engaged. And I was engaged in these issues because as a young scholar and progressive social democrat person, somebody who believed in social democracy and human rights, I was appalled that the Soviet Union was keeping my people in tyranny. And as I learned about what was happening in South Africa, I was appalled that a regime was still using Nazi racist ideology in my lifetime. And as a progressive, middle-class Jewish Canadian kid, I was honored to fight for the liberation of South Africa to end this racist Nazi apartheid. Right? When my grandparents escaped a similar ideology to North America. So, and the ANC at the time and the the movement at the time, they were fighting for social democracy, to create a democratic society where every citizen would be equal under one law. How is it possible that middle-class Jewish kids or middle-class Americans or Europeans can be fighting for a liberation movement that wants to subjugate women, kill gay people, destroy religious minorities or Muslims who are moderate and different than their version of Islam, and try to destroy Israel and exterminate Jews? What is going on? So how can a generation of people be so easily misled is beyond me, and why is the Jewish community and why is the human rights community in this country so late to the table is beyond me. And I think if Elie Wiesel said we were living in a time of an emergency in 2003, we know in the last 16 years things have progressed not in a good way around the world and in our country. And I think it's time we come to the table and educate ourselves and develop strategies and different approaches to deal with this.
Incidentally, as you described your own background and the causes you fought for as a young person right through till today, you anticipated something. I've said this to you before on JPS. I don't want people to hear you and think that you are a right-wing conservative, crazy, but that in reality, that's not where you are at all.
No.
And in my mind, you are exactly what the best of what it meant to be a Jewish liberal was all about as we were growing up. But if somebody said to you anyway, Charles, when I listen to everything you say and you're critical of Barack Obama, blah, 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 are you really, a closet conservative Republican?
Absolutely not. No. I care about human rights. I grew up in a social democracy. I went to McGill University for $200 a year. That was my tuition. McGill can compete with any Ivy League university in the United States of America. I went to great doctors. We had a great healthcare system that every citizen had access to. It was part of our identity and part of our society. So no, I'm a social democrat. I believe in human rights. I believe in strong citizenship, and I believe citizens have the right to education, to healthcare, to workers' rights, to unemployment insurance, housing. These are the lessons we learned after the catastrophe of Europe after the Second World War, that we would never allow situations in our society to exist where totalitarian movements can give easy answers to displaced, marginalized people. And I am concerned that this is exactly what's happening. If a social democrat liberal cannot criticize a democratic president or an American president for engaging with people who want to destroy democracy and exterminate people, then I don't know what happened to social democracy and the Democratic Party in this country. I'm not a Republican. I am not a Democrat. I'm a scholar. I consider myself to be progressive and concerned deeply about human rights and human dignity. And for people to label us in certain ways who are fighting this fight is really detrimental. And I'll say at Oxford University, where we had all these professors come, it was American professors that would get angry. For example, they heard Deborah Lipstadt. She's sort of on the left, I would say. She's a pro-democratic, pro-Obama, liberal democratic person, great scholar. Some people are upset, American conservatives were upset that I invited her. And then Ayaan Hirsi Ali spoke. So the liberal professors from the United States of America were upset that I invited her because she said things that they didn't agree with. And Deborah said things that the right didn't agree with. And I said to these American professors, I said, you're in a university. If you don't agree with Deborah or Ayaan Hirsi Ali, criticize them, argue, quote from the books, give them a run for their money. But we can't start labeling them and not engaging with ideas and debates. And if these exchange of ideas and debates do not happen at a university or within our communal institutions, we're in serious trouble. We need to have debate, and everybody should be welcome to debate.
Okay, so it leads me to ask you, and again, you're in a unique position to answer this question. There is an assault on the First Amendment and the right of free speech. The assault is that free speech should not protect hate speech.
Correct.
That's the argument. And the argument is that people use the internet, social media, to express ideas which are hateful. And therefore, there's this feeling that there should be institutions that limit free speech if it's hate speech, that we are going to encourage private companies from Twitter to Facebook to YouTube to begin to monitor and to take down and take off hate speech. And I want to hear you speak to what you consider the difference to be between free speech, hate speech, and where would Charles Small draw any line at all on the concept of free speech, and how do you see it working in real life in academia?
It's a great question. So I think there's an assault on free speech, and there's major questions in the public discourse about the role of Facebook and Google, and how do you police this exchange of information that's flying around the world. And there is an assault, I'd say, in the university. The issue of contemporary anti-Semitism and some legal ideas and certain ideologies and positions are not really accepted in the academy anymore, and I think that's a serious problem. I think they should be included and debated and discussed and dismissed rigorously, but they should be at the table. So having said that, the United States has the First Amendment, but it's a democratic society. So should somebody sitting in Qatar get on in their computer and be able to influence or to share ideas in the United States that are undemocratic? Does a non-American citizen have the same rights as American citizens that the American citizens enjoy with the Constitution and the First Amendment? So should the First Amendment apply to everybody in the world using the internet who come from non-democratic entities?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not so sure. But
Yes.
Okay.
Because the minute you use the word police, it sends shivers up my spine. I don't want to hear about policing free speech.
Well, so I come from, born in Canada. There are many democratic countries in the world that are truly democratic that have hate speech, that have laws that govern speech. So for example, in British Columbia, one of the provinces in Canada, there was an instance where white supremacist messages were being sent through the internet to British Columbia. And the British Columbia, there was an instance where...
What constitutes a hate message?
So, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a constitutional expert.
I'm not asking you legally.
So
I want to, in terms of your soul, is there, the argument was always, should the Nazis be allowed to march through Skokie, Illinois? That was the quintessential example. Do you allow in America Nazis to, in essence, through a march, preach their hatred, and they chose a Holocaust community to do it? Now, it turned out that the march never occurred, but it was a big issue as I was growing up.
I remember.
And the answer was, yes, you let them do it. And my instinct is to say, the concept of free speech has been one of the most beneficial parts of the United States for the Jewish people. And I don't want to see a limit on free speech. I will, as how I was brought up, and I'm committed to it. I will live with the excesses, because I know the minute you start on the road of policing, the next thing you know, Charles Small won't be allowed to speak, or Ali Hersey will not be allowed to speak, because you'll be defined as hate speech. You hate the Islamic Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood. By the way, whether you do or not doesn't matter. That's what will be said. And I don't want I don't want an IDF soldier to be denied access to a platform on a university campus because he's defined as a spokesperson for hate speech. You open the door, Charles, that's where you're going to bring us.
So that's the quintessential, I guess, a dominant American view. I grew up in a society that protected the rights of citizens. And if there is an individual or a group of people that it is targeting and inciting in a clearly demonstrated way, and the bar is high.
America has the same bar. You can't incite.
It's not. It's a different bar, and it's a different bar in Canada. The bar is different than the United States.
You mean it's lower?
Lower, higher, depends how you look at it.
Incite is incite. You're saying the American,
it's more difficult to squash that expression in the United States than in Canada.
Right.
And in Germany.
Okay.
And in Israel.
But you can't give me an example, can you?
There's examples. Well, there's the Kijkstra affair. There was an example of a Nazi in Zundel. They were distributing Nazi materials, pamphlets and books. They were publishing books in the days of books in the 1980s. And they were tried under this hate legislation, and I believe they were convicted, if I remember well. It was the 1980s. So there are instances in Canada where people were prosecuted for hate speech, and they were dealt with by the system. The bar is high. Canada is a free country where you can express yourself. But there's a balance that has to be met between the safety and security of our citizens and free speech. So, is there a limit? If there's a problem. On the internet now, if you look at counterterrorism experts, we now know that the radicalization process of an active terrorist is shorter. It could be a matter of days because of influence through the internet, and there's all kinds of things that are taking place that are getting people to act violently. How do you deal with that? How do you allow this material?
Don't ask me, tell me.
I don't think I can, to be honest, I don't think I can tell you, but I think these are very important questions that need to be grappled with. And I think we're living in a global age. What's taking the freedom of expression and the First Amendment rights of American citizens, which you and I could probably debate, and we're probably very close to where we are. Canada and the United States is not worlds apart. It's a bit different, but different traditions, but they're both democratic countries where free speech is deeply valued. How do you deal with people or organizations that are in different parts of the world who are out to undermine or out to carry out terror attacks and are using our platforms of free speech and expression to cause tremendous damage around the world and to American citizens or citizens of democratic countries? We're living in an age where these are difficult questions, and there's not even no easy answer. But I think, as Sacha Baron Cohen said, it was flawed, right? But he basically was saying at the ADL dinner that if Adolf Hitler were alive, that he could take out ads on Facebook, right? So depends
what the ad said.
Well, there's a limit. So there's a limit.
Yes, you can't incite to violence.
Well,
if you put an ad in the paper, let's go kill Jews, you can't do it. However, if you can espouse a philosophy, you can do it. And by the way, my test for you is, you and I both believe SJP and BDS is out to destroy the state of Israel.
Correct.
Do you think that
they have anti-Semitism?
Okay. Do they have a right to speak on college campuses?
They have a right to speak.
Oh, really? Oh, really?
No, hang on. They have a right to speak. Do they have a right to have chapters in private entities?
Do they have a right for a spokesperson to come on college campus and argue for SJP?
I would
Can
say,
a BDS person come and argue for BDS?
I would say yes.
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 But
where I would draw the line, I don't think they have a right to have chapters on American university campuses. I think if somebody or some groups are out to destroy universities, they're out to advocate the murdering of people, the destruction of people.
But then they
I don't think they have a right.
Then they shouldn't be allowed to speak.
There was a case at a university in Canada where the Students for Justice of Palestine were having a big meeting. And members of the Jewish community went to the president of the university and they said, we don't want this to take place. And he said, free speech, academic freedom, free speech. And this leader of the Jewish community in Canada asked the president, would you hold a neo-Nazi rally or conference or a KKK rally or conference in your university? And the president, to his merit, thought deeply for a few minutes and he said no. He wouldn't allow it. So there is this double standard.
Yes, there is.
And I think universities, but can a member of the KKK or a member of Student Justice for Palestine come with views and speak? I would say the bar I'd be more tolerable for them to come, but let the community educate themselves and read about what this person is advocating. And then, yes, I'd probably say they have a right to come onto the campus.
Okay. We've talked about this a little bit, but I want to ask it as we sort of wrap up. You've described the problem, and then you've said sort of we should discuss and try to find ways of dealing with the anti-Semitic threats that are coming from both the right and the left. On college campuses, do you have any suggestion for a strategic program that the American Jewish community and Jewish leadership should engage in to protect the State of Israel and Jewish students on college campuses and in the halls of academia?
Yeah. So there's a wonderful example, actually. So I think, as I told you, we kind of took a step back. We went to Canada to regroup, and there's an amazing group of people in Toronto who are helping us. People like Dennis Benny, who's our new president. We're going to make the announcement in the next day or so that he's our new president. He's from Toronto. Mike Diamond, Neil Nisker, Wendy Eisen, who's the Group of 35, the first group to fight for women and Jews in the Soviet Union. It was a group of women in North America that were fighting. And Bram Belsberg, and amazing people. And what they've also done, the Canadian Jewish community has come together and said, okay, we need to confront anti-Semitism in our society. And I would say that the problems facing Canada may be a few years ahead. It's coming to the United States. Maybe Canada's more advanced. And they're taking every organization, small ones and larger ones, and they've developed a strategic plan. They've called this group Must Speak, Enough. And there's student groups, there's policy groups. They've acknowledged the importance of ISGAP in their strategic plan. We'll have a place in the world of education and policy development to help the community confront anti-Semitism. And I think that strategic plan is being repeated in the United Kingdom. The British Jews are doing something similar, and I hope that the American Jewish community will also do something similar. The fact that there's all these small Jewish organizations that have emerged, Stand With Us, the Lawfare program, ISGAP, all these groups that have kind of sprung up dealing with these issues, I think is indicative of the fact that there's a major problem in our society, and the major, large Jewish organizations haven't dealt with it adequately. If they would have dealt with it adequately, there would have been no need for all these smaller groups to emerge. So I think the Jewish community must take a strategic plan with no ego, and really empower Lawfare, empower Stand With Us, empower Hillel, empower scholars, professors, and take a multi-pronged approach to really attack this problem at a deep level. And good scholarship could help AIPAC. Good scholarship can help the policy people on the Hill understand anti-Semitism, understand the foreign influence that the Qatari Foundation and the Saudis have had on our education system. So it has to be a multi-pronged approach, no egos, and everybody really develops a strategic plan. The British Jews, the Canadian Jews have done it. It's time for the American Jews to do it. And to reach out to our friends, to our Christian friends, to our Muslim friends, to our Sikh friends, to really deal with the African American community. We had 20 African American professors at Oxford. When we start discussing the Nation of Islam and how they've influenced anti-Semitism in the African American community, how they've co-opted the Black Lives Matter with this Ferguson from Gaza rhetoric, how the trope that the American Jewish community are sending American police officers to Israel to get training and come back to murder African American men. That's the Nation of Islam. When African American scholars, when moderate Muslim scholars, and there are many in the African American community, when Christian African Americans hear about how anti-Semitism is now entering into the African American community, they're appalled, and they start to work on these issues. So we have to reach out to our friends. When women groups, when gay advocacy groups hear about the oppression of the of the Muslim Brotherhood and how the Students for Justice in Palestine, a progressive group, is helping the Muslim Brotherhood oppress people in the Middle East. We can use intersectionality. We have to be creative and come together and fight the fight more, with more impact.
You are so fabulous. I'm
Yeah,
going to testimony. No, this is
You are.
No, this is interesting. At different points in time, different voices are important. And there are many very important voices who are wonderful on the American Jewish scene and the world Jewish scene. And there are rabbis and Jewish leaders and there are authors. All of them are contributing. But at a given point in time that we are in now, you, my dear friend, are the most important single voice that must be heard. I'm saying to myself, you should be talking to groups of Jewish leaders at the top level in your soft, lovely, reasonable, liberal, and yet passionately Jewish way. And what you have done, you've made a miracle of your own. From the ashes of at Yale, and now you're at Oxford. You're all over the world now. And I am so proud of you, and I'm proud to be your friend.
I'm honored to be here. And it's also wonderful to see your development here at JBS, your development as a journalist, and the whole project that you're doing is really important to the community and to the United States at this moment. So, Golub to you.
Thank you very much.
An honor to be here.
Thank you. Charles Small, founding president of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy, which has just come out with a major study documenting who and what SJP is. Be sure you always know, when you hear SJP, it's Students for Justice in Palestine, and they are one of the most important because of the damage they are doing and the threat they pose, not simply to the state of Israel, but to the free world. Anyway, the Charles's study is on the ISGAP website, a fabulous website. I told you that before. It's really worth your time reading. And as I say again, there is no single voice more important at the moment in the Jewish world than Charles Small's. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have to any of the ideas expressed on this edition of L'Chaim. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. And remember, you can now take L'Chaim with you anywhere you go. We are a podcast. If you want to listen to this conversation again between Charles Small and myself, you can do so anytime you want by downloading the L'Chaim podcast. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'Chaim, my friends, to life.
L'Chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. And we're especially pleased to remind you that thanks to a generous matching gift from the Cayley family, every new or increased dollar you donate to JBS will be worth double to JBS. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.